what I'd like to do is go around the room, and I'm going to pose each one of these questions, and the team that's responsible for that question, if you can pick someone who can represent the views or what you heard about that question, and just share with the rest of the team. There's a couple of folks walking around with mics. You'll see the hands raised. So just wait until you get the mic so the rest of the room can hear. And we're going to try to learn from each other in this session. So thank you very much for participating. The first question, let's go to which team how are you planning future cloud infrastructure development to support internal or external AI applications? Which team is that? Okay, perfect. So how are you? How is your team planning for AI internally and externally?
Okay, we on? Yeah, we're on. Excellent. So interestingly, we felt that the question in terms of how are we planning future cloud infrastructure development in terms of AI, that we were actually a bit behind the curve, because people are still reviewing and analysing AI. AI is in every single conversation, and what does it actually mean to the organisations, let alone what does it actually mean to your infrastructure? So, everybody on the table is in a regulated environment. So firstly, looking at the risks over the benefit of AI. And then both the organisations on the table are large organisations with various different business units. So some business units, rather than centralised IT, are innovating and they're trailblazing. So they're taking that AI infrastructure or those AI requirements direct from the various cloud providers and stuff. So where centralized IT is they're trying to do platform standardization at the moment, and within those standardized platforms that they're building, they're trying to work out what are they actually going to enable, and what will they actually make use of, and how will you actually prove the value of what you've built, and then. Sorry, I did that slightly in the wrong order. So the trailblazers are out there, innovate. So platforms being standardized, the trailblazers are out there and they're innovating, but centralized IT will at some point have to industrialize that. And then the other point that was being made is that in the AI space at the moment as well, it's very hard to predict what your infrastructure is going to need to look like, because the rate of change is just so fast.
It is.
So every time every time you try to plan for a specific LLM or a specific innovation within the AI space, there's a new funky provider in town, or one of the existing providers is bringing new tools to market. So Hashi will be pleased to hear that we did have a think about as well how Hashi might be able to help with some of these problems. So obviously cost optimization, so how you're actually using AI, so cost optimization and how you're using it within the cloud is obviously going to be important. Remote access and also the security assistance. And then the key thing one of the key things that was brought out as well is that the Hashi tools are actually cloud agnostic as well. So that should be helpful. So not directly answered the question, I don't think, in terms of how does it influence, how's AI going to influence cloud infrastructure thoughts, but certainly what do we need to be building today, potentially, to think about how AI may influence that in the future. Did I miss anything?
Yeah, I think that's great. It sounds like, if I were to summarize, it sounds like we need room to experiment and innovate and try out a bunch of different ideas before we settle on what we're going to do industrial-wise, right? So it may be that you prioritize use cases around AI that are sort of internal-facing because they inherently have less risk than doing something that's customer outward-facing. It also means that you need to think through probably things like your data strategy. So what gets imported into the model? Once the model imports the data and tokenizes it, there's not really a lot of ways that I can protect from users who have access to that model. If they ask the right way, they can probably uncover data that maybe they shouldn't have access to. So how do we prevent the wrong data from landing in a model that's serving a persona that doesn't have the rights? I don't know if you've seen this, and there's been a little bit of a discussion around this thing called the confused deputy. Anybody heard of the confused deputy challenge? Yeah. So the idea is that a high privilege system is being invoked by a low privilege system and then is being coerced into giving up high privilege information that the low privilege system shouldn't have. AI is a very good example of a potential confused deputy, and I've got a couple of demos that kind of play with that. But I love the angle that you're taking is you're prioritizing where you want it to work, where the innovation is taking place is in the cloud, where I've got ephemeral resources. I can stand them up and destroy them. I can play around. I can learn what the new ecosystem looks like. And then over time, we understand what patterns are going to be applicable to the business, and then you begin to regulate that and industrialize it. Is that a fair summarization? Yeah, awesome. Any thoughts from the room?
Don't ask me any questions.
No questions, but any thoughts on how you might approach the same? All right. Beautiful. Well, thank you very much. The next group, regarding infrastructure, what is your stance on standardization versus choice for developers, and how have you implemented this? Read that question. All right. I have to get between lights, otherwise I'm blind. There we go.
So we had a discussion around this, and it's effectively there isn't one size that fits all for the different organisations that we all work for. So we're coming to the conclusion that effectively this has to be custom per the organisation you work for, or maybe your customers. Mm-hmm. So a hybrid approach is what we come up to. So we need, or there is a general requirement for, I'm going to use the word standards, but standards or guardrails or some kind of controls, particularly from security and cost point of view. Mm-hmm. If you don't have those, you're going to risk spiraling costs, maybe security risks. You could end up, on the front page of the BBC. That's not acceptable.
It's not ideal. Yes.
You need to have the right balance, because if you're too restrictive, you are going to stop engineers from and developers being able to innovate, spark new ideas, give your organisation that competitive edge. Mm-hmm. So trying to find that right balance is what we think the right answer is. How you go about that is going to depend on your organisation and the people and processes that you need to work with. Mm-hmm. So potentially some like a shopping list kind of things that engineers can select from for their deployment that are pre-approved, and it shows them this is going to make your job easier, better, make you quicker to deploy, and not restrictive and not bureaucratic in any way.
Excellent. Yes. So when we talk about things like guardrails, then we're saying that we have a consistent way to push new infrastructure out, but it will be vetted for compliance, governance, et cetera, so that we don't impose risk. But I still want to grant the developer freedom to make changes and do things with the assurity that I'm going to vet it for you. Don't worry, if you make a change here, we will have the security gates, the guardrails to make sure that you don't introduce frailties. Is that?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. Excellent. One of the things that I was curious about, did you talk about different interfaces or experiences for different groups or skill levels? Just out of curiosity.
No.
Okay. No, that's fine. One of the things that often occurs to me is once we build reusable artifacts, and of course, naturally, as HashiCorp, we have a thesis around something like Waypoint that we can expose this automation to less skilled teams for easier consumption. And so I would have the same reusable components available to people who are down at the command line or writing code. And then I would have the same reusable components exposed via something that's less onerous on a less skilled user. Maybe I'm doing AI and I just want to get my Jupyter notebook and don't tell me about document ingest and model selection and all that kind of stuff. Just vend me an environment, let me go. Anyway, just something I was thinking about, but thank you very much. Any thoughts on this? Any other? Beautiful. Well, thank you very much. I think that sounds great. Yes.
Hi. I think a lot revolves around the sort of personas and tools for the job as well.
That's right.
Especially around and the politics of that. I think when you withdraw tools from developers or give them a very fixed set, they can feel disempowered, and then that could cause more problems than others. So I tend to, as we've mentioned, I tend to try and get that good spread.
Yes.
But have standardized buckets that work across the globe, depending on the culture as well as the respective teams.
Yes, I love that. And politics is a very real thing. Quality of life for the developers, what they get a chance to work with and work on. I want to make sure that they are empowered to use the tools they like to use in the way that they like to use them. So our guardrails, so I think the approach that you were talking about, what's having kind of the consistency in guardrails is absolutely correct. Everybody goes through the same guardrails, but the experience or the tool or the engagement with the system may be wildly different depending on who the persona is, what the politics are that are involved, et cetera. I love it, yeah. Any other thoughts real quick before we move on? All right, the next one. What is your position on deploying an internal developer portal? I guess this gets into that abstraction conversation I was just having there. And how far have you taken this project? IDP, how mature are we with IDP?
That was us. So JLR and Vodafone had this discussion. So our view of an IDP portal, great in principle, okay, but in reality, the size of our organisations, coming up with a portal that can serve everybody across the organisation for all the things they want to do, whether that be security, infrastructure, software development tools, becomes a bit of an arduous task, and there isn't a single owner in the organisation, so you've got a lot of services that different teams specialise in. To create an overarching umbrella portal that actually serves the whole organisation, like I say, it's a nice idea, but it's actually really difficult to achieve. So our view was that the best thing would be a service catalogue. So, and we've seen some success on onboarding developers as they join a company, making sure they've got access to GitLab or vulnerability scanning tools, those sorts of things. But you've got to draw a line. So you need to have that basic access to those systems.
Yep.
And then you federate that RBAC model to the owners of those specific parts of the environment, whether that's a GitLab repo or a group or whatever. So that was our view of the world as to how it would work better is through a set of common services that people can consume. So
Yeah,
don't miss anything.
a more pragmatic approach than saying we're going to develop a UI to rule them all. That seems like a pretty high bar.
The other thing, which you did mention is legacy.
Yeah.
So, we've got an estate that's already been built and is already out there and is already completely different to the next environment, to the next environment, to the next environment. Whilst you can standardize it going forward, the bigger problem that we actually have to try and achieve is getting everybody back from where they are to a common set of gold standard builds or security practices and stuff like that. And that's a really difficult thing to achieve.
Do you think of it like going back to like the persona conversation? Do you think it's possible to have something of an IDP for a given persona or segment, and then maybe you have different flavors for different segments or lines of business? Or
I mean, from my perspective, the IDP bit is almost the portal on top that allows the developers to use it. Generally, developers are fairly switched on anyway.
Sure.
So if you're just providing a standard set of templates that adhere to company policy and stuff like that, it's actually quite easy for them to consume.
Yep.
As soon as you create that overarching portal, that becomes a project in its own right that people have to keep up to date and make sure it's there. So it's just easier to just maintain the service catalog that lies underneath.
yeah, no, I appreciate that absolutely. Any other thoughts? I certainly have. Yep.
Pablo.
I'm excited now. This is going to be good.
No, I agree 100%, by the way. But I think the only thing I would say is for business users, but we not developers or people in technology itself. We build the IDP for people that think they're developers but they're business users. Okay, and I think that area is actually there. What you're probably mentioned, the guy I need a Jupyter notebook, or I'm a developer. I want to use Copilot to do some shit or whatever.
Yep.
That type of stuff is the IDP can actually give you the right environment to expose in a controlled environment to those users, okay? And there are lots of them populating different business units and so forth. I think the other part that I think you mentioned as well, which is I think is super valuable, is all about enablement. in that space. And getting the federated RBAC models, people can enable themselves to build on top of the basic requirements to become a developer and onboard into the company. I think that's key in the concept of the IDP, more than, whatever that shape takes into it. And then one last comment from my perspective, okay, is I don't think the toolkit for a successful IDP is really mature enough yet.
Right.
Okay, so if, to your point, if you have a team that needs to maintain it, then it's an overhead. It's really annoying. Now, if the tools become mature enough, like if Waypoint, sorry to have a dig,
yeah, of course.
Waypoint is a little bit more mature, then probably the overhead to manage an IDP will be lower, and therefore we probably will have a lot more of that approach happening in the organization. I don't think Waypoint yet is at that level that will be just plug and play into an organization or help people create that enablement using Waypoint in that respect. Yeah. So comments.
It's fascinating because I've seen customers who built a UI over the top of Terraform, and they have more of like a drag and drop IDP style engagement with the platform itself. But that's only for a certain audience, right? There's a certain audience that fits. It's not everybody is going to fit into that audience. Obviously, when we talk about things like legacy, may not have that same applicability if I'm dealing with COTS-based applications with very tight maintenance windows and stuff like that. But anyway, there's a lot that we can talk about there, but great conversation. Yes?
Can someone pick a different name for IDP so it's not the same as IDP?
So yes, exactly. That would be a good idea. Let's not talk about like identity and internal developer platform. Great suggestion. I'll bring it up with Gartner and see if they can push something through. All right, let's see. Internal developer platform, what are the missing gaps in your cloud program to achieving your business outcomes? What do you see as the biggest gaps? Who had the gaps question? Nobody? Okay, this will be short then. Next one will be a short discussion. Oh, okay, there you go.
I don't know why I volunteered, but I'll volunteer. Actually, we didn't answer that question.
Oh, okay.
We should have had the AI one, because we answered that more than we answered what was missing. And I think...
Oh, I see, yes.
I think off the bat, when we said what was missing, I said, well, HashiCorp, right? So that was the right answer I can go for.
Oh, boom, love it.
But actually, I think because of the maturity of both of the organisations that are here, that we're already on that journey.
Yep.
Yeah. Some of us may be on the bus, trundling down the M1. Some of us are stuck at the side because someone's nicked our wheels and we've got no petrol left. But we're already on that journey.
Yep.
So it was difficult for us to identify the gaps as to what we needed.
Yep.
But it probably doesn't answer your question because we were answering your question, not ours. So I'm going to hand over to this gentleman and I hope they answered the question.
Sounds good.
Okay, I'm not a microphone talking person. We also didn't answer the question. Really.
Oh, excellent.
We actually answered your question more than we answered our own. It was a really good question for sparking the conversation because we talked. So +1. But we did. We sort of first thing that came up was we were discussing around the sort of differences between public cloud and private cloud. And one of the things that was highlighted around that was the upfront cost of going to like a private cloud and what comes with that. And then sort of trying to bring it round back to the question a bit about where the gaps maybe come from. Our conversation stemmed more around understanding between teams of what is cloud, what is its benefits and how do we work together. And that sort of sparked the discussion around whether or not teams should be more informed around it to have the discussions, or if you should be abstracting that information and having teams working on their bits and then collaborating through that way. So similarly, we didn't really answer much of the question, but it was a very good question to spark the conversation. And now I have no one to hand over to. So
yeah, that's great actually. We often talk about the shared responsibility model that's implied by the public cloud. What is the cloud responsible for? What are you responsible for? And I asked this question at HashiCorp, and it is a challenging situation. When you say that we love to lead by cliche. We love cliche leadership slogans. One of those is who in your company owns security? Everyone, right? And the answer, everyone. Okay. Now, what's the ancillary to that? If everyone owns something, nobody owns it, right? And that is the concept behind the shared services or shared responsibility model. What aspect of security do I need to pay attention to versus what you are going to take care of for me on my behalf, right? Do I need to own every single database secret and the turning, or can that be automated by a third-party team and that's your responsibility? I can let that go. Those are some of the big things that lead to kind of some of the questions you were asking, which was, do we need to train them on everything so they know everything about everything? Because if we do train them so they know everything about everything, they're going to want to do everything about everything. And if that's the direction that we're going to go, how do I audit people who do everything about everything, and how do I secure people who do, it gets a little mushy in the middle when we start talking about how we operationalize that. Pablo.
Sorry. But, when you drive a car, who owns and who is accountable for driving the car?
Yep.
You, right? Because you're the one driving the car.
That's right.
Then you don't have a clue of how the car actually works. You never build the wheels. You never understood how the engine works and anything else, okay? So you don't really need to understand everything, but you need to take the ownership, the accountability while you're driving.
That's right.
Okay? So I always have the same argument in almost every company I work for the last 20 years.
Yep.
I love to go to the business owner and say, hey, do you know how your infrastructure works and everything else? They're like, no, I have no fucking clue. But you're accountable for your business solution, yeah?
Yep.
You're accountable for your outcome.
Yep.
Yes. So that's the answer. If the guy asks more questions, you tell him more because he wants to know more. If he doesn't want to ask more questions because it's enough information for him to run his business, that's enough.
Yep.
That's the answer to it. To how much information you need to give them, how much you need to train and everything else. It's all about what the outcome of that particular part is. Now, the guy who built the wheels, he wants to know how the tires are built, how the rubber is collected or whatever shit, because he wants to build the wheel.
That's right.
To an outcome, again.
That's right.
So that's the piece that we need to care about. How do you actually build that chain of outcomes to achieve what your business needs at the end of the day?
Yeah, and that's certainly where Gartner kind of evolved this idea of the platform team, the producer-consumer model, where there are people who are responsible for the tire, and there are people for driving the car, but there are different personas, and they're responsible for different layers of security, quality, governance, etc. Yep.
And the important part is how do you interface those?
How do you interface?
How the integration happen? At what point your cognitive load is too much, so you need to actually split it and interface between the two areas that you split and so forth. That's the kind of area that we need to start caring about us in our organizations.
Yep.
More than how much you want to know or not know in that respect, which I understand is a relevant conversation, but is how do they work with each other? How do they integrate with each other?
That's right.
Anyhow, I shut up.
Yeah, and it also goes to that trust element too, right? If I'm going to drive on your tires, I better trust that they're going to stay solid, right? That type of thing. Anyway, I love the conversation. Given we have 6 minutes, I'm not sure we're going to get to all of the questions, but we'll do as many as we can before we run out of time. The next one is very interesting to me. How has your org structure evolved to support operational efficiency in your cloud computing efforts? Org structure changes. Is it Pablo again? No. Oh, okay.
It's our table, I'm not doing it.
All right. I'll do it for now and then you can take over. All right, it was a pretty interesting conversation because we have more than one organisation here who have completely air-gapped on-prem infrastructure, so no cloud at all. And some of the challenges that they've had in even adopting, I suppose, cloud-based practices has been cultural and perception, or security's perception of regulations and implementation of those. But what they did share was that some of the way the teams have changed has gone from large pools of developers to much smaller groups of specialized skills, SREs, and focusing on the integrations between tool sets. Is that a pretty fair summary? Yeah. And all of the organizations here are in very heavily regulated environments, industries, from what I recall, and there have been some similarities and differences in the way their journeys to the cloud have evolved, starting with really, really small teams and providing guardrails to users, their internal customers, and how they adopt and provision cloud, to becoming a little bit more defined around best practice, where things really should just be done one way because they're fairly simple.
Yep.
And moving or wanting to move from quite siloed vertical application structures, very much the old world, and wanting to move into those horizontal cloud platform teams, and struggling to do that through probably a number of cultural and I suppose leadership challenges, and wanting to get the business behind it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and lack of buy-in.
Yeah, at that point, it's a little bit of a sales job, right? If we're going to create a horizontal platform team that other folks are going to consume, people have to be willing to give up their tools, right? If they're going to consume what you're going to build, that's a tough sell. But it is something that we see people successfully moving towards. And many times what we'll see is we won't see a single platform team. We'll see several platform teams, and then some of them will have different areas of expertise where they focus, maybe more security and governance oriented versus infrastructure versus networking or something like that. So you may end up seeing multiple, but it's still trying to get to a centralized API consumable form of consumption for whatever that service is. Yeah, I love it. Let's see if we can get to a couple more here. How do you currently manage infrastructure and security lifecycle across your teams today? This feels loaded for this conference. This is a loaded question. I hope you have the right answer.
Yeah, so we kind of basically, everyone's at a different level of maturity on this. And whereas we've got some teams were providing things, the adoption from developers was different at different levels. You get your early adopters, they come in and go, yeah, this has made my life really, really easy. And other people are like, ooh, I'm not touching that, thank you very much.
Yep.
Then there was also, the whole silo thing still. Security team says, you must do this. We don't know how to do that. How do I fix these things that you're telling me to do? Or even to the point of unautomated silos within the organisations, kind of saying, yeah, I can't, I want to automate this, I want to do the security, I want to do the right thing, but you kind of going, yeah, but I've got to submit like 15 tickets before anything actually ever happens.
Yep.
So I can't do the automation, I can't do the life cycle stuff.
Yep.
And there was also, the different tool sets between VMs and containers.
Yep.
It's two sets of tooling that you're having to manage, and then you've also got on top of that Terraform and that sort of stuff. So it's lots of different tools that aren't always fully integrated. And also trying to get that feedback loop going was really useful.
Yep.
But how do you do that? How do you get that information out? Which probably goes back to that IDP.
Yes, it's fascinating because oftentimes I try to talk about this through the lens of what is the cost of a best practice. And I try to look at that individual best practice. If it's certificate rotation, what does that cost us today to rotate secrets on production systems? What's the effort? How many teams are involved? What's the approval process? Who's the, help me understand what that costs me. And then if we come out with a security policy which says, I want those rotated every 15 minutes, you know what I mean? I look at, there's like 6 tools involved here. There's like 4 teams. There's 2 application roles have to take place. This infrastructure, there's all this stuff has to happen for that thing to go from here to there. Yep. Which is an interesting challenge because it puts us behind the 8 ball, and it makes us have to consider, okay, well, how do I drive that cost down? What's the automation approach? I don't want to negotiate with a DBA team for 2 weeks for a database credential or an EA team. Those types of things get very onerous. And if I'm going to do like a 45-day time to live, and it takes me 26 to issue a secret, there's no chance. Do we have time for one more? Is that? Last one. What tools or platforms are you currently using for managing secrets, and how do they integrate with your infrastructure? I think the key here on this question was, how do they integrate with your infrastructure? We oftentimes will have multiple systems for managing secrets, but typically we see in a lot of organizations, those end up being very disparate, where we have a ticket to request a secret and then the infrastructure team does something with it. But how tightly are they coupled in your organization?
Yeah, so our team or table rather, is heavily BT dominated, and then we got NatWest and ARM as well. I think we all found similar problems. That passwords are kind of unsecure, being in places where we don't know, and that's stored on KeyPass or Notepad. We also found that we're not sure how many credentials we haven't been rotated in a long time. So that's kind of a problem we found. I think most of us use Vault, we said. I know in BT we do, and in NatWest and so we use Vault as well. One criticism, we found that Vault is a bit expensive, so if the price could come down, would be great.
Good feedback.
Yeah. And also, like, we found another issue with developers as well. Like when they're developing things, some of them may put passwords in their code, and kind of finding a way to kind of how can we manage that as well. But yeah, so overall, we all use Vault. I think we all like it, we said, but there's just that pricing bit again. But yeah, to answer the question, is Vault. That's what we kind of use. So yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, more and more what we're seeing is automation getting tighter and tighter with those secrets management engines, so that I'm not that's what the ephemeral, obviously you saw the announcements this morning, things like the ephemeral variables and things like that allow us to do things like inject secrets without those being stored, but making a call out to the tool itself to retrieve a secret so the user is not touching it. And if I'm looking at maturing a program, what I'm trying to see is how many secrets do I have in the wild, and is that number coming down? Which requires me to have something like observability. Can I scan my environments and see what's out there? And do I see that number declining over time? And that means I want to be proactive with some of my scans. So there's just a couple of things I wanted to bring up just real quickly on that particular topic. I've never heard the Vault thing before. Did you take that down, Tom? Hopefully you took that down. We'll take that back and we'll talk about it. But thank you very much. We're about 3 minutes over. Apologies for running just a couple of minutes over, but I thought this was such a valuable exercise to hear from your peers on how we're working through some of these challenges. Enjoy the rest of the afternoon.